Welcome back, everyone. And it's Wins Above Fantasy, episode 152. Today is Thursday, August 22nd. I'm Van Burnett, joined as always by Steve Giswelli. We got a very meaningful show tonight, Steve, talking end game strategy. It is playoff season, whether you're in the playoffs, like yours truly over here in week one of head-to-head playoffs, or if the playoffs is right around the corner. I know, Steve, that's kind of where you're at. For the home league, we're also going to be talking roto category strategy, head-to-head tips, and just some do's and don'ts before we get into players, talking some hitters that are actionable ads, a little bit of the drop talk, and then pitchers and streaming matchups is kind of the name of the game this time of year. But Steve, we always say the grind. This is when the grind of the season has a culmination, and it's all the marbles, man. It's why we play. Mm-hmm. It's I don't know. There's a weird sensation when the end of the season comes around, because like you've been working so hard that you're kind of like, all right, it's in fate's hands. But what tonight's show is all about is that it's not just the luck of the draw. There's a lot of advantages to still be gained. And fortune definitely favors the ones who are attentive and watching. Of course, every now and then you just straight up get burned for one reason or another. Luis Heel hitting the IL. I'm not bitter or anything, but yeah, I love this show topic, Steve, because it's a bunch of stuff that is very close to home for me. And I'm sure anybody listening this time of the year is similarly in a spot where they're contending, where they're pushing to get their hands on the trophy, etch their name in the lore of their leagues. But how's it going, man? I know we both had our trips. Glad to hear we're talking offline. The trips went well. Talk to me about all things baseball and non-baseball. How we doing?
Yeah, it's good. Our first, I think, in-season week off in the history of the show, which
ever
does something. And it's kind of fitting because, like, we did skip a week, like in the dog days of August, where you do kind of hit that lull that we talk about each year. And as we're in it, it's kind of like a grind. But at least with head-to-head, like, as playoffs start, like now, next week, and the week after, pretty much for the next 3 weeks are the most popular playoff times, you're kind of thrown right into it and back into a fire and have a do or die situation. And that's kind of why I love head to head. I know there's a downside to it too, because it kind of throws out the whole work of the regular season. But if there's a lot of leagues I play, like, it has a regular season prize too, at least prize money to kind of combat that. But I mean, it's also the same to say for roto leagues. Like, now it's the time to scrap for whatever category you have and do rash things that you wouldn't do back in June or May. Like dropping really good players to focus on certain categories for things like that we can get into. But I feel like we sort of one way or the other hit on this topic. I think it's good to have a formal show about it, just because I think that it's sort of an underrated process. Like, it does sneak up on you, and a lot of people are in the routine of managing their teams.
Exactly.
But it's not, that routine doesn't work from this point on, like whether it's head-to-head playoffs or go time to make up category in roto standings. So I think there's a lot of things to hit on. I've had some good conversations in the Pitcher List Discord recently, just to, like, walk some people through things to do and how to manage our team that we'll get into, some specific examples. So yeah, it's a crazy time of year. It's a fun time of year. The season has 5 weeks left, essentially 6 weeks left. So we got to cherish it, but it's also time to make some decisions that like fantasy baseball is such a grind, and you're taught to be patient and look big, and have all of these processes and ways to manage a team and how to be responsible, and you essentially have to throw that out the window, which is pretty hard to do on a dime like that. So it's a fun time of year, but I think there's also a lot to learn from this time of year, especially in like daily moves leagues and head-to-head leagues, which I think is the most common format. So that's kind of what we're going to cater to. So excited to break down some of the tips there.
Yeah, and you said it too, Steve. It's like it's underrated strategy because you feel like at this point you're kind of just at the levers and doing what you've been doing all year. And I think even that shift of mentality, which like if you're listening, it is a shift. Like starting now, you cannot operate the way you have been doing it for 4 or 5 months. And even that kind of smack in the face and that wake up call is like what you need to hear to change. I mean, the routine has to change. The perceptions on players has to change. And even like the resources you use, because if you're not doing it, another manager probably will.
Mm-hmm.
And that's kind of what we're talking about on today's show. We'll cover it all. We can't go in depth in all of it, but we're going to do kind of the garden variety of strategy from like a subjective standpoint, and then get into kind of theory on players who are droppable, helpful resources, a little bit of that, and then get some pitchers and hitters, which will be kind of going through the exercise that all managers should be going through. But yeah, I guess, Steve, when you think of this time of year, I want to hear your top level thoughts about what does change, because I think for me, the most important thing, especially as I'm now in week 1 of the playoffs,
Mm-hmm.
is it's kind of like now you're jumping without a parachute. So all of the things that you were leaving open a chance, now it's like it's the true chess game, to where like last night, prime example, I know a guy like Nick Pivetta has kind of been a revolver all season. He's kind of been a tricky pitcher because you'll think he's got a tough matchup, and he goes out and has like 9 strikeouts and throws, a shutout.
Yeah,
And you're like,
he'll
oh man,
deal versus the Astros and get rocked versus the A's or something like that.
exactly.
Yeah.
But last night I was like, in any other week, I'm like, all right, Pivetta, you're the wild card. I'm just going to throw you out there. This early in the week, you do not want to get blown up on ratios and give your opponent that leg up. So I looked at obviously you got to know your league rules, your opponent's matchups and everything. But ironically, playing my brother week 1 of fantasy baseball, that's a storied rivalry.
The
But
defending champion brother,
defending
that is,
champion,
right?
you are right. And I lost to him last year as a 3 seed, and he was a 6. So this is there's a lot of lore to this one. But I looked at his matchups and looked at mine, and I said, honestly, this is not my spot. Like if Pivetta gets rocked here, it does way more harm than good. Bench him at Houston, and it wasn't a great start. So it's like that type of example is like, you just have to change how you normally go about your business. And I think it could also be, the types of ads you do, where you're kind of looking much, much more nearsighted than farsighted. I mean, what does upside even mean? If you've got a gauntlet,
there's no such thing. Yeah.
This time of year. So anyway, just want to hear your top level thoughts all around, because it's a different ballgame.
No, I'm in line with you. I tend to have a long leash, and I think that's one of my strengths as a player, throughout like the regular season for head to head and just overall,
Not overreacting.
not overreacting, holding on to certain players, picking up players who are dropped that should do better, or trading to buy low on certain players. And essentially, once the calendar turns to August, in the middle of August, that whole concept needs to change. And it's just about how I can manage each one of these categories, to the best of my ability. It is something that I focus on in a week to week too. Like I try to use my ads wisely, in my home league. Like, if I'm going to stream a hitter on a Monday, I'm going to lean towards streaming a hitter that also has a game Thursday on a light schedule, right? Things like that. Or, if I know that I'm facing a team next week that has one or no closers, like, okay, I could drop my, borderline, should this guy be rostered as a closer, Jason Foley from earlier in the year, because I know that 1 or 2 saves will win the category. So I do focus on that throughout the season. It just becomes hyper focused on that. Like I'm not adding any slumping hitter. I'm adding every hot hitter. I'm not starting any borderline starter in any sort of borderline matchup.
Yeah.
Um, I'm even like guys that are, really good. I would fade from like starting in like Coors or like a Pavetta versus Houston. I don't know. I probably would have done Pavetta versus Houston last night. I don't think it was that bad, right?
It was a tough one.
It was that bad. It was how
No,
many
no,
runs
I'm
did he give
saying
up?
it was a tough decision.
Yeah, oh,
No,
yeah, yeah,
yeah.
yeah,
It
yeah.
wasn't a dreadful
Um,
start, but it was more of a
yes,
hurt than a help. Yeah, I
got
don't
it,
have it
got it.
right in front of me. Let's see. Yeah,
Um,
at 9 ERA over 5 innings, just
okay, so yeah,
two
it was not good.
strikeouts.
So
Yeah.
I would have definitely been burned there.
Another
But
example though, Steve, and this is the one I got burned on the flip, but I think process wise, I'm okay with it. Is like a Ronaldo Lopez came back, had
yes,
Philly, and I was like, nope, I'm not rolling him out on
I
the
would, yeah,
first game back, and he
agree,
goes 10 strikeouts with 2 runs. It's like, yeah,
agree,
or 1 run.
agree.
So
Yeah. So it's tough, but especially in a week, like to manage when you have a big lead in ratios is such an advantage, especially in head to head too. So I totally get it. Like you could take so many more risks and you open up the doors for so many more possibilities. So to build a strong foundation in ratios early on. So, pay more attention to not only necessarily guys that have 2 starts, but guys with 1 starts. We'll get into a nice list of guys with favorable matchups over the next 7 days or so to go out
mhm.
there. But yeah, it's basically at least in head to head to fight for your life for every category and just yeah, essentially in head to head. Like I tend to have over the season of a long. I'm able to withstand droughts and no trust that the overall line, the players that I have will get better. I went through it on this show too, like all through April, May, and most of June. I was complaining about my offense on my team, but I didn't do anything too drastic, and it eventually turned it around. If there's
Mhm.
anything like that, in the playoffs, like no, I'm not gonna. You shouldn't have the patience to do that because
Yeah.
it's 1 week at a time. For Roto, I don't want to ramble on too long, but like you have to focus on the categories that you can gain the most ground in. Like a lot of the websites have Roto standings where you can see. I know Yahoo does, Fantrax does, CBS does too, where you can see how close teams ahead of you are. So like if you're last in the category, but are 20 or 30 saves back of the next team, it's like don't worry. Like
Yeah,
sure you
right.
can get the most ground, but like don't roster any closers like at that
It's not
point or
attainable.
whatever it
Yeah.
is. Yeah, know what's attainable, know what you can go after, and literally cater your team to it. Like you could drop aces, like or vice versa. You could drop, if you have 1 stud closer, right? You could like what's that going to do you if you're not going to be able to pass anyone in saves,
Yes.
and you can do that literally right now.
Yep. Yeah, I think that's a great point. The idea that you put in here that anyone is droppable. I think the flip side of that is because anyone is droppable. Another tip is to just keep an extra eye on who is being dropped around
Sure.
your league.
Hmm.
Sometimes it is the cold hitter that or a guy that was injured, but then they're coming back, and it's like uh, a Max Muncy that's got a couple
Hmm.
homers in his return stint because other managers are desperate. It's just extra incentive to go out and make sure, yeah, maybe this guy's been ice cold for 2 months, but then you see, he got dropped and he's got 2 homers in a row. I'm okay viewing that as a
Hmm.
hot hand. Um, and it might not be someone who shows up on like a most added list because they're 90% rostered, so they're not
Hmm.
being added anywhere. So that's a tip overall. And head to head, like some of the stuff that was just coming to mind was like I mentioned it with my brother, but like know your opponent, know what their team build is much closer than you do in head to head throughout the season. But almost more importantly is know your own strengths and weaknesses. And it's like if you're looking at that matchup and you're playing a guy who's got a squeaky clean offense that they're going to have you on average. Maybe you're not flinching to add again, like a Matt Wallner or a type of guy that's going to dock you 15 batting average points, but it's going to put you over the edge on like homers or something like that. So I think that's extra important in head to head this time of year. A tactic, I going back to benching Pivetta and playing ratios, but we kind of joke around calling it like the underworld because for so long in our home league, it was a race for volume. And eventually we put in rules that like prevented churning to where you're not just getting, someone adding 5 starting
we
pitchers.
We put in ad limits to
exactly.
Yeah,
but all that is like the high volume game. The flip of that is like ruling the underworld by like,
do you have a weekly innings minimum?
25, but I have 4.
Okay, so that's
I
pretty
have 4
low.
closers.
That's pretty low.
Yeah, and I have 4 closers.
Ours is 40.
Okay, so that's much higher. So that's a great point, though. For mine, I've got 4 closers. Granted, one of them is Bednar, who keeps getting rocked. But like, that guy is killing me. But really, with 4 closers, you only need 3 good starts in a week to hit that 25. And then in my home league, it's like we have homers allowed.
Another reason why you could pass on the Pivetta one, right?
Exactly. And like losses is negative, but like if you kind of play the low game and just focus on ratios and all that stuff, it's a strategy where you can start counting categories and you just have to get to that magic number for whatever your league settings are. But it's just much different. And granted, it's tough to recommend that because you get a pit in your stomach as soon as your mentality is like, I'm trying not to lose versus trying to win. And that hurts. But the reality is sometimes you can bench, and certainly on Sundays, right? Sunday is massive in the playoffs to where you can bench hitters from 3:00 on. If you've got average locked up and you've got homers safe and you're losing steals by 5 categories, like all of those crazy tactics just come into play so much more when winning is the only thing that matters.
To complain about my fantasy team, everyone's favorite segment, like the last 2 playoffs that I had, it came down to like the 4:00 games on Sundays that I was eliminated. I'll never forget. In 2022, it was like Carlos Rodon like pitching an extra inning, like flipped our whip category, and then that flipped the category and I lost because of that. And then Albert Azalea got a save in a game that like they were up 6-1 heading into like the 8th inning, and somehow it became a save situation, and the save category flipped it for me. So like, yes, this is super important, and people's matchups and seasons end on those Sundays, even though it is a week long or sometimes even 2-week long matchup. So yeah, it's important to manage things like that and focus on that stuff.
Yep. So the last thing I wanted to ask about head-to-head, Steve, is just kind of like where you're at with this friction between winning the matchup that's right in front of you versus setting yourself up to win the league entirely. And I know it's like it's kind of a tough thing to throw out there, but like when you are going into a weekend, are you full go on fighting for the matchup you got? Like, would you drop a Luis Heel for a closer because you need saves? Like, it's like, so you're all just
1,000,000%.
even if it leaves you weak.
I would do that. Like, and if I were you, like, I would drop Luis Heel in this matchup now, like for something that I needed to win the matchup. Yes.
Yeah.
It is 90%. Like, the most important thing is surviving and advancing. I'll worry about next week. I'm not trying to save ads or have my cake and eat it too. In head-to-head matchups. Like, it's just a matter of surviving and advancing. Like, I am 100% focused on this week, unless it's like guaranteed, like a lock to win. If you're up,
right? If you're gonna win,
there are then sure I'll look to add a 2-start pitcher for next week or whatever. But
otherwise,
first
you
and
get
foremost,
like a bereavement on like a Monday for a Mookie Betts, and you're just like, all right, I can't wait the 4 days.
that maybe not,
Right.
to drop Mookie Betts if let's say he goes on the paternity list or something like that.
Sure.
No, I wouldn't do that because this is in week one of the playoffs or whatever. Like, no, I need him to win. But if Luis Gil is going on the IL and it only seems like it's going to be 2 starts, sorry. Yep.
There's a line there. Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah. Yep.
Well, anything else you wanted to hit on with Roto, Steve? I think you covered, to watch certainly the gap between you and where you can make ground from like a numbers standpoint. I think ratios is one we've talked about in the past, whether average or like ERA and WHIP, just to remember that your opponents can fall at the same time that you gain. So there's a little bit more room to try to navigate that. But anything else you wanted to hit on in the Roto categories as it related to Endgame?
No, I would say focus on like your totals and the limits. There's a lot of time maximum in Roto. I actually didn't know in Draft Champions if you don't hit 950 innings. I was listening to Bubba and the Bloom today. You lose all of your WHIP and ERA stats. So something to focus on there. Like in the one Roto league that I'm doing with a few buddies that just started up. Like I was, pacing for over, 200 innings in the beginning of August, 200 innings over the maximum. And I was like last in or bottom of the league in ERA and WHIP. So like I just basically dropped all of my starters and have, good relievers and have been chipping away at ratios while keeping my innings down. Like things like that I've started to do, a few weeks before this episode even, right? I've seen that as a strategy too, just for season long, like try to get as many wins and quality starts as possible and strikeouts as possible the first half of the season, then just massage your ratios with relievers for the second half, which is a good point. Like, right, like pitchers get hurt as the season goes on, so stack up the wins and Ks while they're healthy and try to build up a lead there, which is an interesting like season long strategy. But yeah, like even like stolen bases, like if you're close in stolen bases and have a low average, like, right, I don't know, like don't worry about your average and just add these, all the Darren Blancos of the world and just try and get steals, right? It's just it's really like you can get hyper focused on what you need and not necessarily have to worry about being the most well-rounded team for the last week. Just focus on what you need for your teams.
Yeah, no, that's a good summary. So that's Roto head to head and overall strategy. We're going to start getting into a little bit of the player side here, talking about kind of the idea of droppable players, some helpful resources, and some starting pitchers. But we're going to take our first ad break, and we'll be right back after this. Okay, so Steve, we talked about it with Luis Gil. In general, players that are droppable, a penny for your thoughts there. And then if there's any guys that we want to kind of pick on as drop candidates, I think we can do a little exercise. But your thoughts on, how quick or how short the leash is this time of year?
Anybody who is on the IL is droppable. Even if it's going to be a minimum stay, even if it's not an IL stint. Like if somebody's banged up, like, I'm debating this right now. Like, say a Suzuki like couldn't really play the field and had to take a few days off and hasn't really been the same since. Since the calendar turned to August and there was a corresponding injury with that. Like I'm considering dropping him. Tyler O'Neill had that leg infection, and has come back from the IL. Hasn't really looked great. I'm considering dropping him. Riley Green homer tonight. I was doing the same thing. Like anyone that's going through an injury, whether they're on the IL or not, I think is considered droppable because when guys play hurt, they're not as good.
Right.
And it takes a while for guys to get their timing back. And like honestly, if this was the playoffs right now, like next week, if Tyler O'Neill's not, if he's still striking out 7 out of 15 at bats, like I'm sorry, I don't have time for that. Like if he gets hot next week, he gets hot next week. Maybe I can
Mhm.
add him back. But and some of the inspiration for this episode just came from my chats this week with Ashton in the PL Discord. Ashton, Brian Wu, and Bryce Miller's biggest fan in there. So whenever they're starting, you'll definitely see him in there. And he was just, we were just chatting back and forth. He was picking my brain on some just topics and just things that he was going through and dealing with, and who to drop and who to add at this point in the season. He was debating dropping Francisco Alvarez and Wyatt Langford. I'm like, yeah, man. Like, I'm not
Yeah.
saying that in deeper leagues those guys are droppable, but in his situation in like a 10-team league, there's plenty of guys who are hot
Yep.
that we'll get into in a little bit here that are much better plays for the short term. And like you could drop those guys with no remorse. So basically anyone who's struggling, anyone who's hurt, depending on the depth of your league, like you can move on and not have to worry about it. Like it's kind of nice. Like you don't need to, you lose that, like when you drop those guys in April and May, you're always like, oh, my one buddy always picks up those players, always reaps the benefits. It's like
Right.
you don't have to worry about that anymore because there's not really much time, and like you just you'll find something else in the meantime.
Right. And yeah, exactly. You'll find something else in the meantime because that's like you can do that in a way that is targeting matchups. It's a changing hand.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, as long as you're looking at things like their schedule, I think it's totally valid. So what about a guy like this? Is a tougher one, Steve, but like Stephen Kwan, been great all year. Past month, he's hitting 221. Is Kwan a guy that, like, just from this theory, like he's an average first guy who's not helping on average? Do you just chalk that up that like he has to turn it around, or is that an example of like someone you'd be comfortable moving on from?
I'd already be moved on from Stephen Kwan, honestly, at this point.
Mm-hmm.
If you have a guy for 104 at bats that bats 221 over his last 30 days, and his one category that he contributes to solidly
Uh-huh.
is average, and he's not giving you that. I don't care that his overall line is 831. Um, it's with hyper focused categories, guys like that. I think it makes it even more doable to do
Mm-hmm.
something like that. So
Mm-hmm.
yeah, that's a good one. And honestly, like I would move on from a player like that. Sure. Like Stephen Kwan getting hot isn't 3 homers in a week. Stephen Kwan getting hot is 10 hits in a week, which is
Mm-hmm.
nice and good for your average. But when you have a guy that goes on, a homer binge, that's runs, RBIs, home runs, and the hits too. So I think it's a little bit easier not to pick on Kwan. I've been a fan of his and have praised him a lot on this podcast, but um, unless he's dropped and like you're close in average, right? And you need to, there's the flip side of that too. But like in a
Mm-hmm.
head-to-head league, like no, I'm not holding on to him through this slump.
Yeah, I think it's fair. And if if we're willing to say that for Quan, then it goes double for a handful of other guys that are much fringier, right? Because Quan, while he is one category, it's also we know when he's good, he is
Yes.
elite in that category. So like
Mm-hmm.
just scrolling through like my league free agents, like there are some that are some guys who are still being rostered who don't offer as like a Wilson Contreras, like
Mm-hmm.
um, no reason to keep a guy like that rostered when they're struggling the way that they are. Whereas, yeah, we get the point. We've exhausted it. The idea anybody is droppable, certainly if they're hurt
Mm-hmm.
or low playing time. Also, if it's a what have you done for me lately type of approach. Helpful resources, Steve. I just wanted to throw this out. I think we've got a few here, but Fantasy Pros has a good streaming pictures view that you can just kind of scroll and look at probable pitchers against soft teams day over day. On Pitcher List, Sam Lutz has a weekly risers and fallers article that comes out. I think he's been doing it for like 4 or 5 months this year. But it's a nice little piece to just see, you don't want any of these fallers on your team, even if it is a guy that's been a stud, like Lawrence Butler was in this week's. And I don't know if my brother's listening to this, but he's rostering Lawrence Butler. And
he just got dropped in my team, in my league, after helping a team go on a run for a month, right?
Like, yes, it's the perfect example where, like, he was on fire. He was probably a top 5 player in the league, but in the past month, he's got a sub 740 OPS, so he's not helping a lot there. The past couple of weeks, he's batting 194. It's time to move on. So yeah, that's that Sam Lutz Pitcher List. And then Scott White, I know we've had Frank on before over on CBS. Scott's a friend of Pitcher List too, does PitchCon. He does a great weekly sleeper hitters article that will focus on just some deeper advantages that are to be gained on, things like if there's platoon splits and certain hitters have like a righty heavy lineup, that those are guys. I like Brandon Lau was on there this week. Joey Bart, who we're going to talk about, was also on there. And that's turned out well. So it's just that type of a thing that it's like, you look at those things on Sunday, you move quick, you make your ads so that you've got them for the week.
Tristan Koffroff at ESPN still does. I know ESPN Fantasy doesn't really mix now, but he still does that weekly fantasy baseball forecaster, which is absolutely awesome. It's just a breakdown of everything you need to know for the week. There's also the probable grids over at Fangraphs. Nick Pollock does his daily and next day starting pitcher rankings and streaming pitchers. There's a ton of PL Pro tools as far as PL Bot, and that gives a streaming pick too. The thing that I use the most, and it's behind a paywall, but I've always paid for it, is the Razzball Streaminator and Hittertron. Their projector tools. It's very similar to the ones at Pitcher List too, which Nick's is free, but the PL Bot is behind the paywall too. Join PL Pro, you get access to that. Cannot recommend that enough. But yeah, I still love the forecaster. I look at that every week. It has teams hitting rankings, every single part, starting pitcher, and who the hitters are facing, like teams with 7 games, teams with 5 games. Like, that is the difference between me rostering a player and not, whether they have 5 games or 7 games, as far as like the hitter goes. So something to keep in mind, and just plenty of great tools out there to mention. And we'll get into it in a little bit, but John Anderson, John PGH on Twitter, does a great tweet every day with like great guys facing bottom offenses like Miami, White Sox, Washington, Pittsburgh, LA, the Rockies on the road. We'll get into some of those names. I guess we can now. There's a few other names that we want to get in there, but it's time to really only worry about this stuff, right? Like, it's nice to do this in the beginning of the season. It's like, oh yeah, I'll turn the last part of my roster for a hitter playing in cores, or a 2-star pitcher with like one matchup. But it's like, no, like most of your roster, other than like the studs and your core pieces, should be guys that are in these good matchups. And you ride that out and put yourself in the best position to win each week in head-to-head, at least.
Yeah, well said. The pitchers themselves, I mean, we can bounce through these, Steve, but just scrolling through that in terms of the immediate, you guys are listening to this on Thursday, most likely. Bobby Miller gets the Rays on Friday. I know Miller.
I can't do it.
Yeah, I was just about to say, talk about a cherry bomb. That's probably a feast or famine one, because that could be ugly
if you're in a playoff spot and need to throw
some
a Hail
heroics,
Mary,
right? You need some heroics. That could be one.
Mm-hmm.
Bowden Francis, interesting. He's had 3 really good starts in a row, and he gets the Angels on Friday for the
that's a
Blue
must
Jays.
start, in my opinion. Yep.
Yeah, that's a good one, and he's certainly under rostered. Hayden Birdsong, we talked about a couple episodes ago, had a strong outing. It was at Oakland, and then he's at the Mariners on Friday. I don't think I like it as much as the Francis one, but it's an option. Ben Lively gets Texas on Saturday. Matthew Boyd gets Texas on Sunday. Javier Assad is a tricky one, Steve, because like the ERA is low, the WHIP is high, the Ks aren't really there, but he does get Miami.
Yep.
In Miami on Sunday.
I'd roll with that for sure. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So those are some, and then even cheating ahead. This is, again, goes back to my question for you on like winning this week versus next week. Like, if you've do you load up on 2 start pitchers before the rest of your league does and use a precious roster spot?
If I'm not playing for anything this week, or if I know that my matchup is locked up as a win.
Safe. Yeah.
Sure. Otherwise, no, I'm focusing on the guys that could help me.
But that's the chess move, and that's an approach we haven't talked about yet. Is like,
and if you do take that risk, you're in a much better shape. Yeah.
Well, next week, Jameson Taillon, 35% rostered, goes at Pittsburgh on Monday and at Washington on the weekend. So the Nats, those are 2 really good matchups. But the one that I just cannot believe, Steve, that Jeffrey Springs, 30% rostered after. Maybe I'm just a Springs guy compared to the rest of the world, but he's looked good.
I'm riding with him right now, man. So I'm on your side.
Nice. And he's a 2-start pitcher next week, and gets at Seattle on Monday, and then the Padres on the weekend. And yeah, Springs, since he's been back, has looked really good, especially his last 2 outings when he had 8 strikeouts and 7 strikeouts. So 15 Ks in 10 innings. Both of those allowed just 1 earned run each. So Springs, it looks like he's now up to 49% rostered on Yahoo, but that's still so low, especially with a 2-start week looming. And I think he has a good matchup even before that.
He is Oakland tomorrow, or as you're listening to this, on the 22nd. Yeah,
there you go. So
in Oakland, and I know the A's were like one of the best offenses in July, but they have come down to earth. They're not the A's of last year, but they're not also the A's top 5 offense in the league of July.
Yep. Yeah. So that's kind of a handful there, but again, some pretty easy charts to look at via Fantasy Pros to kind of look through and see some of that stuff. Steve, what did you want to hit on as it related to kind of offenses that you want to target against?
Yeah, John PGH at JON PGH on Twitter has a lot of like cool baseball scripts and everything, and scrapes a lot of data and puts out some like interesting automated tweets and a lot of other good stuff too. He has a good Substack, so shout out to John. But he does a probable pitchers versus basically the bottom 6 or so offenses that you want to face, and it's Oakland, Miami, White Sox, Washington, Pittsburgh, Angels, and the Rockies on the road. So there's a tweet that goes out, every 5 days or so, with the next 7 days starter, or maybe it's every once a week. That would make sense. But there's just a quick guide into a few days in a week into a future of guys that you want to have versus some of the best offenses, like, because it's I know like Yahoo only shows like probable starters a day or 2 out in advance. Fantrax does a day or 2 out in advance. You could look too on the fantasy baseball forecaster and the probable starting grids on Fangraphs, but this is a nice quick summation of all the teams that you want to stream against, and all the players that are facing them. So no team really stands out, but for your single stream matchups, it's a good resource and a good list. So be sure to check out that reference for sure.
Yeah, that's a great call there. And we have hitters as well that we are going to jump into, but we got to take our second ad break. We'll be right back after this. So, Steve, looking at hitters, hot hitters, we talked about some of those resources to look at. Of course, you can just kind of go out and sort from your league stats over the past week. Keep an eye out for interesting names. Anybody who, again, was cold for a while and came back. A prime example of that for me is, and I use the rolling charts to make this decision, but Jonathan India, who was like red hot for a month straight, then he got ice cold for a while, and I went out and was really surprised to see like his rolling charts looked way better than what his struggles had shown. And so I jumped back in, and so far so good. He's been just kind of putting hits together. Tonight he's got a homer and a steal, and he's kind of turning into a waiver wire hero for me. But some of these guys that I wanted to highlight started with Torkelson, because it's like poetic justice for a year-long script here that we've been saying, what happened to Torque? He's one of the busts of the season. We all liked him, back in spring training. He's been ice cold. Now here we go. We got Torkelson called up in his first 3 games. He has 3 extra base hits. Last night he went 4 for 4 with 3 singles and a double. Tonight, granted, he's 0 for 4, but just Torkelson has that type of like name value, and also just kind of the raw tools to where you're like, that could be what we end up calling. He has the stuff to be a league winner if it all kind of clicked at the right time. So Torkelson, it's a tough one, but again, in the spirit of like this exercise this time of year, you go out and look at what's coming up, and he's got the White Sox in Chicago this weekend, and then the Angels after that. So like my thought, Steve, is I'm giving this one a stamp of go ahead and roll the dice on Torque, and then see what he does against the White Sox and the Angels. After that, I think he's got the Red Sox in another tough matchup. But at least, one series at a time, White Sox, then Angels. What do you think on Torque?
I'm with it. I mean, a 4-hit game, and there was a great tweet. I don't know if Chris Towers put it out, or he retweeted it, but Torkelson had a XBA above like 920 on all 4 of his batted balls last night on Tuesday, and it was like only the second time that has happened in the Statcast era. So like he absolutely crushed all 4 batted balls, which I know it's a small sample size, but hey, when you're doing that, like that's the sign of a heater, right? I know he went over 4 tonight, but that could make the world of difference, and I would absolutely be willing to give Torque a shot with that.
Again,
he had a double and a triple 2 nights before, so yeah, for a guy like that, like we saw how hot he got down the stretch last year, maybe it's the last 6 weeks here.
And that's the one where it's like, if you know that your team already is kind of a punt average type of team, that's a really good example. Or if head to head, you look over and the guy next to you just has contact hitters up and down the lineup, you're probably not going to win average, but Torkelson could help you in a lot of other ways.
Another thing too that we didn't really that I didn't really hit on as far as just like the overall strategy. If you do have that buy, like you have in our league, like you would have 8 ads to play with. Like I would add Torkelson in that case and see if he stays hot. Like why not? You have nothing to lose. I would
The shiny
in that
toy,
case,
toy.
sure. Yep. If Luis Heel is only going to miss 1 start or something, then you afford yourself to add a guy like that, right? Like I know Hunter Green got dropped in a lot of leagues. It seems like it may not be that serious. Maybe he's only missing the 2 starts. You would add him there. If you're in a playoff spot, obviously you can't do that. But if you do have the buy, that those are some things that are just something that you can keep in mind and toy around with.
Yep. It's a great point. Mentioned Joey Bart earlier. Past week, couple homers, couple doubles. He's at Seattle this weekend, which is far from great in terms of ballpark or staff. But next week is Brewers Marlins. So again, that's just the type of swap where like Wilson Contreras, who it has been mediocre at best. Why not roll the dice with a guy who's a hot hand play right now? But that's also one that Joey Bart was on that hitters to target article this week. So if there's another catcher that's on a hitter to target, you have to be thinking that kind of short term. But yeah, I like that you added.
Yeah, you
Jake
got me
Bart.
thinking now of if I should be just making the swap for Wilson Contreras. I know he's been a bit icy over the last month, but the thing I do like about Wilson Contreras is that he plays every single day, and he is the kind of guy that could just randomly hit 2 homers in a game. So
he has that for sure. Yeah, my thought was I think I was picking on him because hitting 214 the past month. It's kind of picking nits on where you draw the line, but he does. I mean, Contreras has a road series against the Twins coming up, and your playoffs don't start until next week, Steve. So
next week,
it's a moot point. But
yeah.
I like that you added in Jake McCarthy. I think steals are probably of any category the most. I would say the most predictable that you can kind of hunt for an advantage. So, like, I think that's a really big one. If you're looking like your matchup is going to be decided by 1 or 2 categories and it's Wednesday or Thursday, you're probably going to get a steal or 2 from a specialist. So that's food for thought. Like Whit Merrifield is another one that we've got on the list. He's got a couple steals in the past few games, just 10% rostered. But yeah, McCarthy, man, I added him. I think he's been a little bit cold this week, but he's been and you had him rightfully as like a fade at the start of the year, but he's had a nice little bounce back. And oh yeah, that's right, he had the home run tonight. So 2 homers in his last 3 games. That's not what was on the bingo card for McCarthy, but
no, and the Diamondbacks are, one of the best teams, one of the best offenses over the last 2-3 months. So to get any shares of them, that's also why I mentioned Eugenio Suarez. I believe the Diamondbacks play a series in Colorado. I'll look that up right now, but there is a lot to like about the Diamondbacks offense. So to get shares of them any way possible is something that I would be interested. They're at the Red Sox, home versus the Mets, home versus the Dodgers. They're at Colorado the 17th through 18th of September. A few series at the Brewers. And I know that Arizona isn't the hitter's ballpark that it used to be, but there still is. It's still the second highest elevation field, and it's still a good place to play. And they do end with a 6-game homestand at the end of the season. So their end of the season is at home versus the Brewers, at Colorado, at Milwaukee, another good hitter's park, home versus the Giants, home versus the Padres. So
yeah,
September, I want some D-backs in September for sure.
Yep, that's a good one. Yeah, Merrifield, I know I mentioned him briefly, but he's now getting the regular playing time. They got the Nats this weekend, and then the Nationals allow the 6 most steals in the majors, which is another thing you guys can look at closely is like team stats. But catchers, I would definitely bet on Merrifield getting a steal between Friday, Saturday, and Sunday.
We did do a segment on the catchers to target, I think 2 or 3 episodes ago. So go back to listen to that. I know the Mets give up a lot of steals. The Giants, if I'm correct, especially now if Bailey's out for a while. I think he just went on the IL. I know he's a really good framer and defender. I don't know how he is at throwing out runners, but sort by the most steals allowed, fewest caught stealings. Cubs, I think, are down there. They have like one of the fewest caught stealings in the league. So if you need steals, target guys that are playing those teams.
Yep, absolutely. Anybody else, Steve, that you wanted to highlight in the hot hitters?
Yeah, I think it's always important to talk about Rockies. Guys like Brendan Rodgers, Michael Toglia. 12 of their final 15 games are at home. They do have a 9-game road trip to start September. But in the short term, they have 3 games at Yankee Stadium this weekend, which is obviously a great place to hit, and then a 7-game homestand for the week of the 26th. So you want Rockies for the next 10 days. Then you don't want them for the next 9 games. Then you want them for the rest of the year.
Yeah. Well,
because I don't want any Rockies that are on the road. I really don't want any of them.
Yeah, last I looked, Brendan Rodgers was putting together a nice little run. I have not
Michael
done
Toglia, Michael Toglia has 20 homers. I know it's and his average has creeped up to like 220. It was hovering around 200 for the rest of the season. I know guys like I've seen like Ryan McMahon hit wires because he's just been so
yeah, Rodgers
over the last
364 average for Brendan Rodgers in August. I knew he was hot. I'm not sure I
the
realized
power. So I don't know if the power is ever going to be there, but but I mean, I'm still interested in
22% roster
in any of those guys when they're at home. Yeah, and it's Miami and then Baltimore for that homestand for the Rockies. So some pretty bad pitchers. I know Baltimore's kind of going through it with their rotation and bullpen. So I am excited, to say the least, for that Rocky series next week. I will be making sure I have at least one or two of those guys.
Yeah, I love it. Man, I think that rounds us out, Steve. I'm just looking, like I said, I got the Luis Heel factor. I'll probably flip flop Heel with activating Ronaldo Lopez, which is an easy one. But you heard the tone of my voice on Bednar. He's about ready to get the axe. And if he does, I'm just looking up and down this list, wondering.
Yeah, that's another thing I didn't put it on the rundown, but there's some interesting closers that are or some saves availability out there. Porter Hodge for the Cubs got the save last night on the 20th on Tuesday. He's been really good. Like he's been like the 7th and 8th inning before that, and they DFA'd Hector Neris. I think Porter Hodge is going to run with that job. I'm just bringing up available players in my league who have had saves over the last 7 days. Angel Chavili, I believe that's how you say it, in Colorado. Victor Vodnik went down. So he got the save, and he's been, pretty good. But I mean, a Colorado reliever is kind of tough. Jason Foley, guy that they mentioned earlier in the podcast, has kind of taken back the role. I believe he's pitched in the 9th inning the last few times. Ben Joyce is still out there in a lot of leagues. He seems to have the job in Anaheim. It's only 2 saves in the month of August, though. It's just there's not going to be many opportunities. But he did pitch the last 3 save opportunities. I think there was 1 blown save in there. Oh, no, there wasn't. But he has pitched in the 9th. He pitched in the 9th in a 4-run game on Tuesday. So there's that to consider. I think Evan Phillips may be a guy that I know Michael Kopech's been a hot ad. Daniel Hudson got a save last night, but that was after Evan Phillips got the save the night before and pitched in back-to-back games and 2 out of 3 games. So Evan Phillips has quietly been awesome again in the last 30 days. 8.2 innings, 11 strikeouts, 2 saves, 1 win. I think he gave up 1 run in that time. So he looks to be back in form. I know Lance Przdowski has wrote up how he ditched his cutter, which caused him a lot of issues versus left-handed hitters, and he's going now 4-seamer. So I think that the fact that I think that there's going to be a lot of saves to go around in Los Angeles for the Dodgers, and it's going to be between Hudson, Phillips, and then Kopech. But Kopech, they've had to rest for like 3 days after he had that amazing run. I would bet that Phillips get the most saves, and I don't know if that's like the best odds. I think probably the best odds would be Kopech.
Yeah.
I could see Phillips getting the most saves the rest of the way for the Dodgers, just because he looks
Yeah.
good. He had the role. It's like that's kind of like something like they wanted to work him back in for that long.
Yeah.
Kopech, they could be more careful with and give him rest when they need to and play him more in matchups rather than being like, okay, if it's a save in the ninth, it's you. Like maybe they need to have some more flexibility with Kopech there, especially as they have eyes towards the playoffs. So I could see Phillips getting a bunch of saves down the way. And then Edwin Ucita in Tampa Bay has been absolutely filthy. He got the save last night, and Peter Fairbanks may be out for the season with a lat injury. I don't know where the Rays just make these really elite relievers. The dude in 30 innings pitch has a .567 whip.
Mm.
What?
Mm.
He is absolutely filthy. So I would add him just like for ratios. Even the Rays do tend to play bullpen games, but he did get their most recent save in the first one since Fairbanks went down.
Yeah, he was added up by team in first place in my home league, so that's a killer. But yeah, that's the luxury is you can pull the trigger fast on those kind of spec guys when you get the buy. So, oh, I love it, man. It's a great topic. It's critical for the year, and yeah, we'll Steve will have to be texting on this. I am up pretty healthily in my matchup right now. So
All right, yeah, it's still a little early, so don't even go there. But
yeah, no.
good luck. I know, especially
Not
after last year, after the tough elimination.
But yeah, we're not thinking of that. We're thinking good thoughts here. But yeah,
No.
any
So
closing?
what's your playoff schedule like? You have 1 weekers, 2 weeker matchups.
No, we do 1-1-1. It used to be where the final was 2 weeks long, but then I think
Okay.
Yahoo moved off that. Dude, we haven't even talked. The Yahoo app update might have been the worst thing. It's driving me up the wall, dude.
You got to get that league over the Fantrax, man.
I know. I think so.
Especially with all your wacky categories and everything.
I know we got weird ones.
You got to put your foot down on that.
Are you not on any of the Yahoo? Have you seen the
I
like with the
I
giant?
am. Yes, I am. I am on a Yahoo. Yeah, they always do the update for like fantasy football season, right? So yeah, I have seen it and I'm on it. I do a league on Yahoo.
But I mean, just since we're this late in the game, in terms of the show, I got some vibes going on with the home league, Steve. O'Neill Cruz, we'll have to do a recap. I feel like that one episode we did has been like the crystal ball between Vlad, O'Neill Cruz, and it was one of those ones where we got to come back at the end of the season, see how these predictions went. But like they've been going well. But I got Tyler Fitzgerald, McCarthy, India's been hot, and then Mookie coming back.
Oh man, yeah, you're
like
getting hot at the right time.
It's clicking at the right time, but I'd have to run the gauntlet between when you don't have a buy, you gotta beat everybody.
Oh yeah. Makes it sweeter though, right?
Yeah, I just got a feeling, so I'll put it there. How about you though? I know last year you were like checked out, even though you're in the playoffs. You're like, my team's going the wrong direction. Like, where's your head at?
Yeah, it was funny. Last year I had Turner. So like he was my first pick and he went on that toured run. And I remember I lost in the first round on like that Alzolay save. And my team was just absolutely on fire for the 2-3 weeks after that. So I could have made a run at it. I think I hinted at it, or maybe it was off air, but I had a really, really good stretch for like a month and a half, the 2 to 3 weeks prior to that. I'm hoping that, and then that was led by, Vlad going MVP 2021 Vlad for however long he did. So I'm hoping that Riley Greenback, he had a homer tonight. Maybe he can get going again. Ellie also, another homer tonight in the steal. Maybe he can he's had sort of a streaky season where he started off super hot, went down to like batting in like the 230s, got up to like 265, 270 again recently, and then it slipped back down. If I could click again, I'd feel good about myself. I did lose Jared Jones, Grayson Rodriguez, and Joe Ryan. So basically my 3 best pitchers. Jared Jones should be back next week. He struck out 10 in his last rehab start. So he should be back Monday. But I've had some guys sort of carry the way. Shane Boz has been better recently. Ober was actually dropped, and I picked him up for like the start of his run. He's kind of been my ace. So
Yeah.
I don't feel as distraught as I did last year. I have some more confidence in my team. And it also would be nice if Fernando Tatis ever got back. That would be nice. But I don't know. I have my doubts about that.
Yep. Well, we'll be texting throughout the way, and this is it.
This is it. This is the home stretch. This is the fun stuff. Good luck to anyone entering the playoffs, trying to chase down roto categories. Like, this is it. Like, we're here. It's a sweat from here on out.
Yep. And before you know it, sadly, the long off season.
Yeah, I signed up for the too early pitcherless mock. Make sure you go in there and throw your name in there. You should sign up for that too. Volunteer in there. Maybe we can get some good content on this.
Love that. Yep, I'll do that right now. All right. Well, that rounds us out, guys, for episode 152. Hope you enjoyed the show. We will be back weekly through the remainder of the season. Even though we had our little vacation week, we are back on the weekly agenda. But until next time, thank you, guys. You can follow us, as always, on Twitter at WinsAbovePod. I'm at Van_verified. Steve is at Stav8818. That wraps us up for episode 152. Thanks for talking baseball with us.
Thanks for listening, guys. Good luck with the home stretch.